I felt my blood pressure rising. Robert, I've never even raised my voice at that woman. I know that and you know that, but she's got some residents scared. However, there are others getting tired of her power games. You're not her only target. As ye. I hung up. I realized this exceeded just my pond. Sandra was establishing a pattern of intimidation, and I was simply her latest project. Time to begin documenting everything. Sandra apparently decided that if one government department wouldn't assist her, she'd try them all. The following month felt like bureaucratic whack-a-mole. First, another code enforcement visit, this time with a list of 26 supposed violations Sandra had helpfully provided. Everything from improper dock construction to unauthorized tree removal. The inspector spent 4 hours reviewing the list with the enthusiasm of someone auditing insurance claims. Sir, he finally told me, whoever filed this complaint either has severe vision problems or an overactive imagination. Your property is cleaner than most public parks. Then came the state environmental department. Apparently someone reported me for commercial fishing operations on my private pond. The officer who responded was an agreeable fellow named Mike, who took one look at my single fishing rod and tackle box and began chuckling. Let me guess, Mike said. Association dispute? How did you know? You'd be surprised how frequently we're called about illegal fishing that turns out to be someone fishing their own pond. Usually involves a neighbor who thinks they understand wildlife law better than wildlife officers. But Sandra's masterpiece was the social media campaign. She created a Facebook group called Pinewood Community Watch and began posting daily updates about various threats to neighborhood tranquility. My morning fishing somehow became early morning disruptions affecting property values. The isolation tactics were more subtle, but equally irritating. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to the annual community barbecue I'd attended for years. Neighbors, who used to wave, started looking away. Even the postal worker mentioned that some residents had been asking questions about my activities. Time for deeper investigation. I spent another weekend in the public records office, this time examining the association's formation documents. What I discovered made my contractor's attention to detail very, very satisfied. The original 2015 association incorporation clearly excluded my property from their boundaries, but there was an amendment filed in 2020 that somehow magically expanded their jurisdiction to include my land. Here's another crucial fact. Property cannot be added to an association without the owner's written consent. They can't simply vote you in like you're joining a social club. It's like your neighbor deciding your garage is now part of their homeowners association. Completely illegal, but people attempt it anyway because most folks don't understand the law. I took this information directly to my attorney, who immediately became alert like a detective catching a lead. David, he said, this is fraudulent. They've been operating under false jurisdiction for 4 years. We can not only force them to stop, we can pursue them for harassment under false authority. The attorney sent another letter, this one with considerably sharper language, threatening litigation for fraudulent boundary claims and demanding immediate cessation of all enforcement actions against my property. The association board surrendered faster than a collapsed tent in a windstorm. At their next meeting, they voted to temporarily suspend any enforcement actions while they reviewed jurisdictional issues. Sandra was reportedly furious, but I thought I'd prevailed. Major mistake. Never underestimate a narcissist who's been publicly humiliated. Sandra shifted strategies from pseudo-legal harassment to personal attacks. She began questioning my family background at neighborhood gatherings, making contemptuous comments about people who don't understand community values, and wondering aloud whether certain residents were truly suitable for Pinewood. The aroma of diesel fumes and the sound of gravel under wheels announced her next escalation. I was replacing a ceiling fan in my garage when Sandra's Lexus entered my driveway, followed by a police cruiser. My stomach sank. What had she orchestrated now? The officer approached carefully while Sandra remained by her vehicle, arms folded, wearing an expression of righteous satisfaction. Sir, we received a report of threats made against a neighborhood resident. Could we ask you some questions? Threats? Officer, I haven't threatened anyone. Ma'am claims you approached her aggressively last evening and made statements about making her pay for interfering with your property. I stared at Sandra, who was nodding earnestly at the officer. Officer, I was in my workshop all evening yesterday. I haven't spoken to this woman in weeks. Do you have any way to verify that? Thank heavens for security cameras. I'd installed them the previous month primarily to monitor the pond when I wasn't home. The footage clearly showed me working in my shop from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. the previous evening, exactly when Sandra claimed I'd confronted her. The officer reviewed the footage on my phone, then walked back to Sandra. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see her face reddening by the moment. When he returned, he looked apologetic. Sir, I'm going to file a report about making false police reports. That's a misdemeanor in this county. You might want to consider filing a harassment complaint yourself. As Sandra departed, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt, the officer shook his head. Between you and me, he said, we're familiar with that address. Gets exhausting, you know. Any advice? Document everything. People like this usually destroy themselves eventually. You just need enough evidence. The false police report backfired on Sandra in ways she probably didn't anticipate. When the officer mentioned my security cameras, something clicked in my mind. If I had cameras monitoring my property, what else might they have recorded? That evening, I walked the perimeter of my land with fresh perspective. Near the back corner where my property line bordered the subdivision, I found something that made my blood boil. A well-established footpath leading from the housing development straight to my pond. Not just any path. This was established, trampled, earth, broken branches, even some makeshift stepping stones across the muddy section. Following the trail to its destination, I discovered what can only be described as an unauthorized recreation area. Someone had constructed a crude dock extension onto my existing structure. There were permanent-looking Adirondack chairs arranged around a stone fire pit, fishing rod holders bolted to trees, and a weathered cooler chained to an oak tree. The scent of old charcoal and stale beer lingered in the air like evidence of countless trespassing parties I'd never known about. I installed trail cameras that weekend, 8 of them, motion-activated with night vision, strategically positioned to cover every angle of the unauthorized access route. Cost me $450, but I had a feeling it would be worth every dollar. The footage was absolutely incredible. Over the next 3 weeks, I documented 52 separate instances of trespassing. Families having picnics, teenagers hosting parties, adults conducting fishing competitions. One memorable night captured what appeared to be a full barbecue with at least 25 people. But the real treasure was Sandra herself, appearing in the footage no fewer than 12 times. Sandra, who claimed to be frightened of me. Sandra, who'd called the police about my threatening behavior. There she was, bold as brass, using my pond like her personal resort. Time for some detective work. Robert Garcia had become my unofficial intelligence network, and he provided information that made the trespassing suddenly logical. David, you need to see this, he said, showing me a copy of the association's annual budget. Look at line item 52. Pond maintenance, $18,000 over 4 years. They've been charging residents for maintaining your pond, Robert explained. Sandra told everyone the association was responsible for keeping the community water feature in good condition. Here's information that'll astound you. Always audit association budgets if you suspect fraud. They often include expenses for property they don't actually own or maintain. It's like your neighbor charging you for washing their car and calling it community vehicle maintenance. But it got worse. Robert had also obtained a copy of the association's insurance policy through a friend. On the board, listed there under covered properties, was my pond, described as community recreational water feature. Let that sink in. The association was collecting insurance premiums from residents to cover property they didn't own, while I was paying separate insurance and bearing all the liability risk for people using my land without permission. I called my attorney immediately. David, he said after reviewing the evidence, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud. Multiple counts: tax fraud, insurance fraud, probably theft of services. We're talking potential criminal charges. The power dynamic had just shifted dramatically in my favor. Sandra, meanwhile, was busy digging her hole deeper. At the next association meeting, which Robert faithfully reported to me, she announced that the board was considering emergency measures to deal with ongoing security threats from certain property owners. She's talking about installing security cameras pointed at your property, Robert told me. Claims it's for community protection. Better, I said. I'd love to have more footage of people trespassing on my land. There I was at dawn, mug of coffee warming my hands, standing on my private pier when a convoy of patrol cars roared up my gravel drive in Pinewood Meadows. The Homeowners Association chairwoman was jabbing her finger at me like I'd committed murder, shrieking that I was unlawfully fishing on shared community land. The absurdity struck me immediately. I'd held title to this 4.5-acre pond since 2008, and these residents had been crossing my boundaries for years without permission. What Sandra and her committee didn't realize was that I wasn't some pushover handyman they could intimidate. I possessed 42 years of ownership documents, $450 worth of surveillance equipment, and a very experienced lawyer on retainer. What would you do if your neighborhood association attempted to claim your family's pond? Leave your thoughts below, because what unfolds next represents the most gratifying legal victory I've ever witnessed. These self-important officials chose the wrong landowner to antagonize. I'm David, a 44-year-old contractor who believed he'd inherited paradise when my uncle died in 2008. 4.5 acres of untouched woodland surrounding a 1.8-acre natural pond that had belonged to our family since 1985. Each dawn I'd stroll to the water's edge, inhaling the crisp aroma of cedar mixed with the organic scent of pond water, hearing the melancholy cry of herons echoing across the surface. The early fog would drift upward like spirits dancing on the liquid mirror, and I'd cast my opening throw, feeling blessed beyond measure. When Uncle purchased this land, nothing but wilderness and agricultural fields stretched for miles. He acquired it cheaply before developers discovered our remote section of the township. The pond teemed with smallmouth bass and sunfish, nourished by underground springs that maintained the water pristine and cool throughout the seasons. I retained the original title documents, the boundary stakes, and 42 years of tax records. Ownership had never been questioned, but paradise inevitably draws trouble. From 2013 to 2016, the upscale development Pinewood Meadows emerged rapidly. Abruptly, my tranquil wilderness sanctuary was encircled by $450,000 to $650,000 residences housing affluent professionals and retirees who'd relocated expecting country club facilities. Many newcomers gazed at my pond and presumed it accompanied their property purchase. The initial signs of conflict appeared in 2019. Courteous requests initially: could their children use my dock for fishing? Would I object if they launched canoes? During weekends. Being reasonable, I agreed occasionally, requesting they coordinate with me first. Basic respect, I thought. Then grievances began. Unnamed reports to municipal offices about mosquito issues from stagnant water, indirect criticisms at local shops about certain people failing to maintain their land properly. I discovered empty bottles and tangled fishing lines scattered around my shoreline. Enter Sandra Mitchell. Arriving like an antagonist in a television drama, Sandra relocated from Arizona in 2020. A woman in her late 50s with an immaculate silver bob that likely exceeded my monthly utility bills, driving a black Lexus sedan that she positioned as if she owned every parking spot in town. A former corporate executive with a smile that never touched her eyes, and remarkable skill at making requests sound like commands. Within 8 months of arriving, Sandra was elected association president. I should have recognized the warning signs when she began her campaign promising to increase property values through rigorous community standards. Translation: she intended to make everyone miserable until they submitted to her authority. The first major confrontation occurred on a Sunday morning in spring 2024. I was walking toward the pond with my coffee, anticipating peaceful fishing, when I heard the mechanical buzz of a power drill. Someone was mounting signs around my property. No trespassing signs on my land without authorization. I approached to find Sandra herself, dressed in what resembled expensive outdoor gear, directing two workers with post-hole equipment. Her cloying synthetic fragrance reached me before I was within speaking range. "Excuse me," I said, maintaining composure. "What's happening here?" She pivoted with that rehearsed smile, her heels clicking on the pavement. "David, just helping. Clarify property lines for everyone's benefit. You understand? I understand you're installing signs on my property without consent. These signs get removed immediately." Her expression hardened. "Well, there's been confusion about public access to community facilities." "There's no confusion. This is private property." That's when I witnessed the real Sandra for the first time. The facade slipped, revealing pure entitlement wrapped in moral superiority. "I don't think you comprehend your situation here," she said, her voice dropping to that menacing tone wealthy people employ when threatening you. "This neighborhood maintains standards. Some residents simply don't belong." That declaration marked the beginning of war. 3 weeks later, I discovered Sandra didn't appreciate having her authority challenged. I was enjoying my customary early morning fishing routine, coffee still steaming in the cool air, making that first perfect cast across the water when I heard vehicle doors slamming. Multiple doors. Sandra emerged through the trees like she was commanding a tactical unit, accompanied by 3 other board members I barely knew. "Mr. Thompson," she announced, using my surname like we were in litigation. "We must discuss your continued violations of community regulations." I surveyed my own property, my own pond, holding my own fishing pole. "I'm sorry, what violations?" Sandra's assistant, an anxious man named Craig, who consistently wore polo shirts like a uniform, stepped forward with an official envelope. "This is a cease and desist notice from our legal counsel regarding your disruption of neighborhood peace and unauthorized use of shared recreational amenities." The morning coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I could hear my fishing reel clicking freely in the silence as I processed their statement. "Shared recreational amenities?" I repeated. "You mean my private pond that I own?" "The association has determined that certain amenities affect community property values and therefore fall under our authority," Sandra recited from what appeared to be a prepared script. "Continued violations will result in daily penalties of $1,800 with potential liens against your property. Here's what I learned about bullies. They depend on you being too stunned to respond effectively. They ambush you, overwhelm you with official-sounding nonsense, and expect you'll collapse under pressure." Sandra had obviously done this before, but I'd been raised by an uncle who taught me that when someone threatens your livelihood, you don't get angry, you get methodical. "I'll need to review this with my lawyer," was all I said. Sandra's smile broadened like she'd achieved victory. That weekend, I spent 14 hours at the county records office examining public documents, best $25 I ever invested in parking fees. What I uncovered was enlightening. The Pinewood Meadows Association was established in April 2015, 3 full years after I inherited my property in 2008. Here's crucial information for anyone facing association. Overreach. An association formed after you already own your property has no legal jurisdiction over you. They cannot retroactively claim authority over existing landowners. It's like forming a chess club and then insisting that everyone who already owns chess sets must follow your playing rules. Armed with this knowledge, I did something Sandra probably didn't anticipate. I retained a legitimate attorney. Cost me $6,000 for the initial consultation, but money well invested. Within 72 hours, my lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to the association, demanding they immediately stop their intimidation campaign. Then, I took offensive action. I posted copies of my property survey and deed in the neighborhood social media group, with a respectful explanation of actual property boundaries. The response was immediate and revealing. Multiple neighbors commented supportively, and several shared their own experiences of Sandra's overreach. Sandra's response was predictably spiteful. She deleted my posts, blocked me from the group, and posted her own message claiming I was harassing board members and creating a threatening environment for families. But here's where Sandra made her first significant tactical mistake. She escalated to government agencies. 4 days later, a municipal code inspector arrived at my door with a clipboard and a puzzled expression. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming my property violated 19 different municipal regulations. Honestly, the inspector said, examining my well-maintained property, I'm uncertain why I'm here. Everything appears compliant. Someone reported you were operating an illegal camping facility. Did they specify who filed the complaint? He checked his documents. Listed as concerned resident, but confidentially, most of our anonymous complaints originate from the same telephone number. He glanced toward the development and shook his head. Some people have excessive free time. The inspection took 30 minutes. 0 violations discovered. The inspector even praised my dock craftsmanship. But Sandra wasn't finished. That evening, I received a call from Robert Garcia, my neighbor living nearest to the subdivision. Robert was a retired mathematics teacher, straightforward type, who'd been observing this conflict unfold with increasing concern. David, he said, I think you should know what Sandra's claiming at board meetings. What now? She's telling people you threatened her physically, claims she's frightened to walk her dog past your property. But Sandra's most revealing comment came when someone asked about the pond maintenance budget. Some people, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, don't understand that living in a quality community comes with certain responsibilities. If they can't contribute to shared amenities, perhaps they should consider living somewhere more suitable to their circumstances. The barely concealed classism was getting harder for even her supporters to ignore. That's when I realized Sandra's fatal flaw. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my property simply because she wanted it. In her mind, the pond should belong to the neighborhood because it would make her life more pleasant. My legal ownership was just an inconvenient technicality to be worked around. I spent the next week organizing my evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Security footage, financial records, insurance documents, witness statements from Robert and others. The timeline was becoming crystal clear. The association had been systematically defrauding both me and their own residents for years. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted accountability, and I was about to discover that Sandra had given me everything I needed to destroy her completely. The bombshell arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday morning, disguised as routine government correspondence. I was sorting through the usual bills and advertisements when I spotted an envelope from the county assessor's office regarding a property tax assessment appeal review. Strange. I hadn't filed any appeals. My property taxes were reasonable, and I'd never had issues with the assessment. Opening the letter, I felt like I'd been struck in the chest. The Pinewood Meadows Association was listed as a co-applicant, requesting a reduction in my property's assessed value due to shared recreational facilities reducing individual property tax burden. They were claiming partial ownership of my pond for tax purposes. I drove straight to the assessor's office, letter clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime, which it turned out it basically was. Ma'am, I asked the clerk, can you explain how someone else can file tax appeals on property they don't own? She pulled up my file on her computer, frowning at the screen. This is unusual. According to this application, the association claims to maintain and insure the water feature, therefore qualifying for partial tax relief under shared amenity provisions. They don't own, maintain, or insure anything on my property. Do you have documentation proving sole ownership? I placed my deed on her counter. Owned by my family since 1985, never been shared ownership. Her frown deepened. Sir, if this application contains false information, that's tax fraud. We'll need to investigate this immediately. Tax fraud. The words hit me like lightning. Drove home in a daze, but my brain was racing. If Sandra was bold enough to commit tax fraud, what else might she be lying about? I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing every document I could find. The insurance revelation was even more infuriating. I called my homeowner's insurance company and asked a simple question. If someone else's insurance policy lists my property as covered, what does that mean legally? Well, the agent said, either there's been a mistake or someone's committing insurance fraud. You can't insure property you don't own. That's like me taking out life insurance on a stranger. And if someone's been collecting premiums from people to cover property they don't own, that would be theft, plain and simple. The scope of Sandra's fraud was staggering. She wasn't just harassing me, she was systematically stealing from her own neighbors while committing multiple felonies. But the real revelation came when Robert called that evening with intelligence from his wife, who worked at the bank. "David, you're not going to believe this. Sandra's husband filed for business bankruptcy 2 months ago. They're in serious financial trouble." Suddenly, Sandra's behavior made perfect sense. She wasn't just a power-hungry narcissist. She was a desperate woman trying to maintain her lifestyle and social status while her world crumbled around her. The association presidency wasn't just about control, it was about survival. She needed the position for her resume, for her reputation, for her sense of self-worth, which meant she'd fight to the death to keep it. "Robert," I said, "what would happen if Sandra lost the association election? She'd be humiliated, probably have to move. Everyone would know about the bankruptcy, the fraud, everything." I hung up with a new understanding of my opponent. This wasn't just about my pond anymore. Sandra had bet everything on her ability to intimidate me into submission. She'd committed multiple crimes, alienated half the neighborhood, and destroyed her credibility with local authorities. She was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. But I now held enough evidence to destroy her completely. Tax fraud, insurance fraud, theft, trespassing, filing false police reports. Any one of these could result in criminal charges. Together, they painted a picture of someone who'd lost all perspective on reality. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my attorney, who nearly dropped the phone when I explained the tax situation. Second, to the district attorney's office to file criminal complaints. Third, to a local newspaper reporter who'd been investigating the story. "This is bigger than a property dispute," I told the reporter. "This is organized fraud targeting an entire community." Sandra had wanted to play hardball. Time to show her what a real power play looked like. Time to build a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. First priority, upgrading my legal team. My original attorney was excellent for property disputes, but I needed someone who specialized in association fraud and had courtroom experience with white-collar crime. After 4 consultations, I found Maria Rodriguez, a litigation specialist, who'd made her reputation taking down corrupt community associations. "David," she said after reviewing my evidence, "this is a prosecutor's dream. We're talking about a pattern of fraud spanning multiple years, multiple victims, and multiple agencies. I'll take this on contingency because I'm confident we'll win substantially." The beauty of a contingency arrangement, I wouldn't pay unless we won, and Maria was confident enough to bet her time on our success. Next came the professional evidence compilation. Maria recommended a forensic accountant to analyze the association's financial records, all of which were public information that Robert had been helpfully collecting. The accountant's preliminary report was damning: $52,000 in questionable expenses over 5 years, including the pond maintenance fraud, unauthorized legal fees, and what appeared to be personal expenses disguised as community management costs. But we needed more than financial records. I hired a professional land surveyor to create an updated, court-admissible survey of my property boundaries. Cost me $9,500, but here's crucial information. Professional surveys are worth every penny when fighting property disputes. They're legally admissible evidence that carries more weight than any association map or neighborly agreement. Never trust amateur boundary marking when your property rights are at stake. Meanwhile, Robert was building our community intelligence network. Turns out Sandra's reign of terror had created more enemies than allies. 8 other residents were quietly documenting their own harassment stories, and a retired accountant named Mrs. Williams volunteered to help analyze the association's books. Sandra tried to fine me $6,000 for having the wrong color mailbox, Mrs. Williams told me. When I asked to see the regulation she was citing, she said community standards don't need to be written down. That's when I knew she was making it up as she went along. The trail camera surveillance was producing comedy gold. In addition to the trespassing footage, I'd captured Sandra herself conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance missions around my property, sometimes with a measuring tape. One particularly entertaining clip showed her trying to move one of my survey markers, apparently not realizing that tampering with property boundaries is a felony. I upgraded my camera system with night vision and added 3 more units covering angles I'd missed. The goal wasn't just documentation. It was creating an overwhelming volume of evidence that would make denial impossible. Maria connected me with an investigative reporter from the county newspaper who specialized in local corruption stories. Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Robert, had been tracking association abuse cases across the region and was thrilled to find such a well-documented example. "This hits all the buttons," Jennifer explained. "Fraud, abuse of power, targeting working-class families, elderly victims. Plus, you've got actual evidence instead of just complaints. When can we schedule interviews with your neighbors?" The criminal complaints were progressing faster than expected. The district attorney's office assigned an investigator who seemed genuinely excited about the case. Apparently, white-collar crime in suburban community associations was a growing problem, and they'd been looking for a solid case to set precedent. "We've got tax fraud, insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and theft of services," Detective Martinez explained. "Plus harassment, possibly extortion, depending on how we interpret the fine threats. Your documentation is exceptional. Most people don't think to save everything like you did." The insurance investigation was moving forward too. Sandra's insurance company was not happy to discover they'd been collecting premiums under false pretenses. They'd opened a fraud investigation and were considering criminal referrals of their own. All the pieces were falling into place for a coordinated offensive. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Simultaneous legal, criminal, and media pressure that would make denial or cover-up impossible. I spent evenings organizing evidence, files, creating timelines, and coordinating with our growing team of allies. The smell of printer ink and the sound of paper shuffling became my evening soundtrack. But underneath the administrative tedium, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine confidence. Sandra thought she was fighting someone she could intimidate. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who understood that documentation, patience, and systematic preparation beat emotional tantrums every time. The community was starting to turn against her too. Word was spreading about the financial irregularities, and several residents were asking pointed questions at association meetings. Sandra's support base was cracking. Time for the final phase, letting Sandra destroy herself while the cameras rolled. Sandra's desperation manifested in ways I never could have predicted. The first sign came on a Thursday morning when I discovered my dock had been vandalized overnight. Someone had taken a crowbar to the decking and cut my fishing line storage. My tackle box, which I'd foolishly left outside, was gone entirely. About $2,200 worth of lures and equipment that had belonged to my uncle. The smell of fresh wood splinters mixed with pond water told the story of recent destruction. And my trail cameras had captured every detail in high-definition glory. The footage showed 3 teenagers I didn't recognize doing the dirty work around 3:00 a.m., but the real prize was the wide shot that caught Sandra's black Lexus parked on the road nearby, engine running, headlights off. "Amateur hour," Detective Martinez said when I showed him the footage. "Conspiracy to commit vandalism plus using minors to commit crimes. She's really going for the full felony collection." But Sandra wasn't finished. Over the next 3 weeks, I received a barrage of anonymous complaints filed with every government agency imaginable. Code enforcement received reports about unpermitted structures and environmental hazards. The health department heard about standing water-breeding mosquitoes. Someone even called the fire marshal, claiming I was storing flammable materials near a water source. The most creative complaint went to the state environmental agency, claiming my fishing was disrupting endangered waterfowl nesting. The biologist who came to investigate was actually impressed with my pond's ecosystem. "Whoever filed this complaint doesn't know much about local wildlife," she told me. "You've got one of the healthiest small pond environments I've seen in years. Keep doing whatever you're doing." Sandra's social media campaign escalated to all out. Character assassination. Fake reviews appeared on my business website claiming I was unreliable and hostile to customers. Someone created a fake Facebook profile using an old photo from my company website and posted inflammatory comments on local business pages. But her masterstroke of stupidity came when she tried to turn my own customers against me. I was finishing a residential electrical job when the homeowner approached me with an uncomfortable expression. "David, I need to ask you something. Someone called me yesterday claiming you were under investigation for fraud. They said I should be careful about paying you." "Who called you?" "Wouldn't give a name. Said they were from the Community Safety Committee, but the caller ID showed a local number." That evening I cross-referenced the number. It belonged to Sandra's landline. Here's where Sandra made a critical tactical error. She went after my livelihood. Up until that point, this had been about property and principle, but attacking my business, that was war. Maria Rodriguez was practically salivating when I told her about the business interference. "Tortious interference with business relationships," she said. "That's big money damages. We can now sue for lost income, reputation damage, emotional distress." Sandra just turned a property dispute into a 7-figure lawsuit. But the real entertainment came when Sandra decided to get creative with law enforcement. I was replacing switch plates in my kitchen when I heard the familiar sound of multiple vehicles in my driveway. This time it wasn't just police. It was police, paramedics, and a fire truck. "Sir, we received a 911 call about someone having a medical emergency at this address," the paramedic explained. "Caller said an elderly man had collapsed and wasn't breathing. I'm the only person here, and as you can see, I'm fine." "False emergency calls are a felony," the police officer said grimly. "This is the 4th one this month from your neighborhood. Someone's trying to tie up emergency resources." The 911 recordings, which became public record after the investigation, were pure gold. Sandra's voice was clearly identifiable on 3 of the 4 calls, despite her attempts to disguise it. She'd reported a heart attack, a possible drowning, and shots fired at my address. Each false emergency call was a separate felony charge, but Sandra's pièce de résistance was her attempt at bribery. I was checking my mail when she appeared like a bad omen walking up my driveway with the confidence of someone who thought she held all the cards. "David," she said, "I think we can resolve this situation like adults." I kept my phone recording in my pocket, a habit I'd developed after the false police report. "I'm listening. The association is prepared to offer you $30,000 cash plus exclusive fishing privileges for your family in exchange for your cooperation in resolving our boundary disagreement." Cooperation meaning what exactly? You withdraw your complaints? We formalize a shared use agreement for the pond and everyone wins. And if I don't agree? Her smile turned predatory. Well, these legal battles can be very expensive and very public. Small business owners can't afford that kind of attention. I had it all on recording. Attempted bribery, extortion, and threats. All captured in Sandra's own voice. The beautiful irony. Sandra thought she was offering me a way out when she was actually handing me the final nail for her coffin. Sandra's final gambit was so outrageous it bordered on comedy, if it hadn't been, potentially devastating to my property and health. 3 days after her failed bribery attempt, I received an official-looking letter from the city's environmental health department. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my pond was contaminated with hazardous runoff that posed a significant public health risk to the surrounding community. The complaint was detailed, technical, and completely fabricated. It claimed chemical. Analysis had detected elevated levels of petroleum products and heavy metals in the water, supposedly from my electrical work equipment being stored too close to the shoreline. When the environmental inspector arrived, he brought a full hazmat team and looked ready to declare my property a Superfund site. "Sir, we're going to need to test every inch of this water," he said, suiting up like he was entering Chernobyl. "If these contamination levels are accurate, we'll have to condemn the property immediately." My stomach dropped. A contamination finding could not only destroy my property value, it could bankrupt me with cleanup costs. But here's the thing about actual environmental professionals. They know their business. After 45 minutes of testing, the inspector started looking confused. "This is some of the cleanest natural water I've ever tested," he said, pulling off his protective gear. "Whoever filed this complaint either used fake test results or..." completely made up the data. Fake test results? The complaint included a lab report claiming to be from Aquachem Environmental. I called them this morning. They've never heard of your property, never tested water from this address. Creating fake government documents is a federal crime. But Sandra wasn't finished destroying herself. That same week, she attempted to organize a boycott of any local business that served me. She created flyers claiming I was under investigation for environmental crimes and a threat to community safety. The flyers were distributed to every business in town, complete with my photo and a warning that supporting dangerous individuals enables community harm. The response from local business owners was swift and unanimous. They called it harassment and threw the flyers in the trash. Several shop owners contacted me directly to express support and share copies of Sandra's insane manifesto. "David," said Tom from the hardware store, "in 35 years of business, I've never seen anything this crazy. She's making herself look like a lunatic." But Sandra's masterpiece of self-destruction came when she decided to take her case to social media with a public video. Robert Martinez sent me the link with the message, "You have to see this. She's completely lost it." The video was a 25-minute rant posted to the neighborhood Facebook group, filmed in Sandra's living room, with the kind of lighting that made her look like a horror movie villain. She claimed I was part of a conspiracy to destroy property values and that my pond was illegally harboring criminal activity. The conspiracy theory got wilder as the video progressed. According to Sandra, I was working with outside agitators to take over the neighborhood, and my phishing was actually coded signals to criminal associates. The comment section was pure gold. Neighbors responding with confusion, disbelief, and growing concern for Sandra's mental state. Several people suggested she seek help, and one neighbor flatly called her delusional. But the real kicker came at the end of the video when Sandra made direct threats. If the authorities won't protect this community from dangerous individuals, residents may need to take matters into their own hands. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices to preserve their way of life. Threatening vigilante action against a neighbor on a public forum while claiming they're a criminal, that's textbook harassment with implied threats of violence. Forwarded the video to Detective Martinez, who watched it with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators making fatal mistakes. "David, she's basically confessing to a campaign of harassment while threatening future violence. This video alone is enough for criminal charges." The community response was immediate and decisive. By the next association meeting, 7 board members had submitted written demands for Sandra's resignation. The subdivision's property management company sent a formal letter stating they would terminate their contract if the harassment continued. Sandra's support base had evaporated completely. Even her closest allies were distancing themselves, terrified of being associated with someone who'd gone full conspiracy theorist in public. The smell of victory was in the air, mixed with the clean scent of morning pond water. My trail cameras were still capturing daily evidence. My attorney was preparing multiple lawsuits and criminal investigators were building cases that could put Sandra behind bars. But I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted Sandra's public humiliation to be complete, witnessed by the entire community that had watched her try to destroy me. The monthly town hall meeting was coming up, and I had a plan that would end this once and for all. Time to let Sandra hang herself with her own rope in front of everyone who mattered. The final confrontation. The Pinewood Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. What should have been a routine monthly town hall meeting had turned into the social event of the year. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. David Thompson was finally going to face off with Sandra Mitchell in public, and nobody wanted to miss the fireworks. I arrived 20 minutes early to find the parking lot already packed. Cars lined the street for 4 blocks, and I could see neighbors streaming toward the building, with the eager anticipation usually reserved for championship games. The buzz of excited conversation filled the evening air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Inside, every seat was filled with people standing along the walls and crowding near the doors. I spotted familiar faces throughout the crowd. Robert Martinez gave me a supportive nod, Mrs. Williams smiled encouragingly, and even some of my electrical customers had shown up to watch. The local newspaper photographer was setting up in the hay, corner, and I was surprised to see a camera crew from the regional TV station. Sandra sat in the front row, surrounded by empty chairs like a quarantine zone. She was dressed in what I can only describe as courtroom formal, a navy blazer and pearls that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But her perfectly styled exterior couldn't hide the tension radiating from her like heat from pavement. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, his voice barely audible over the murmur of 180-plus residents packed into a space designed for maybe 90. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unusual situation tonight. Mrs. Mitchell has requested time to address what she calls ongoing threats to community safety, and Mr. Thompson has requested equal time to respond. Mrs. Mitchell, you have the floor. Sandra stood up with the confidence of someone who still believed she could control the narrative. Her heels clicked across the linoleum as she approached the podium, and I caught a whiff of that overwhelming floral perfume that had become her signature. Thank you, Mayor Thompson. I'm here tonight because this community faces a serious threat to our safety, our property values, and our way of life. She launched into a prepared speech about dangerous individuals who refuse to respect community standards and use intimidation tactics against law-abiding families. According to Sandra, I was everything from an environmental hazard to a criminal mastermind running some sort of pond-based operation. The crowd's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Eye rolls, head shakes, and barely suppressed snickers rippled through the audience. Someone in the back actually laughed out loud when Sandra claimed I was illegally operating commercial fishing activities. After 12 minutes of increasingly unhinged accusations, Sandra concluded with a dramatic flourish. If our elected officials won't protect us from this individual's criminal behavior, then concerned citizens may have no choice but to take action ourselves. The room fell silent. Even Sandra seemed to realize she'd just threatened vigilante violence in front of 180 witnesses and a TV camera. Mayor Thompson looked uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson, your response? I walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder, feeling remarkably calm despite the weight of the moment. This was it. Months of documentation, investigation, and patience, all leading to this moment. Thanks. You, Mayor Thompson. I'd like to start with a simple question. I opened my folder and pulled out the first exhibit, my property deed. Mrs. Mitchell, this document shows I've owned 4.5 acres, including a private pond, since 2008. Could you explain why your association has spent $18,000 over 4 years maintaining property you don't own? The crowd stirred. Sandra's face flushed, but she remained silent. Perhaps you could explain why your association's insurance policy lists my private pond as a covered community amenity. I displayed the insurance documents on the projector screen. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Or maybe you'd like to discuss why you filed tax appeals claiming partial ownership of my property to reduce the association's tax burden. Sandra shot to her feet. This is harassment. He's twisting. Ma'am, Mayor Thompson interrupted. Please let Mr. Thompson finish. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. Mrs. Mitchell, last week you offered me $30,000 to withdraw my complaints against the association. Would you like to explain to everyone what you meant when you said small business? Owners can't afford legal attention? I played the recording. Sandra's voice filled the room clear as day, offering bribes and making threats. The crowd erupted. Shouts of, "What the hell?" and "Are you kidding me?" echoed through the building. Several people were on their phones, presumably recording or sharing updates. Sandra was standing now, her face cycling through shades of red that shouldn't exist in nature. You recorded me without consent. That's illegal. Actually, I said, calmly, Virginia is a one-party consent state, but here's my favorite part. I clicked to the next slide. Trail camera footage of Sandra and 3 teenagers vandalizing my dock. Would you like to explain why you were supervising minors committing felony vandalism at 3 a.m.? That's when Sandra completely lost it. This is a conspiracy, she screamed. He's working with criminals to destroy our neighborhood. Someone needs to stop him before... The room fell silent as Sheriff Williams walked through the back door, flanked by 2 deputies. Perfect timing. Sandra Mitchell, Sheriff Williams announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. You're under arrest for filing false police reports, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit vandalism. The room exploded. Camera flashes lit up Sandra's face as she was read her rights in front of the entire community. Her perfectly styled facade crumbled as handcuffs clicked into place, and the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood for months was led away in disgrace. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause, not for Sandra's arrest but for justice finally being served. The aftermath 4 weeks later, the legal dominoes fell exactly as predicted. Sandra pled guilty to multiple fraud charges in exchange for probation, community service, and $55,000 in restitution, money that would be distributed among the association residents she'd been stealing from. The association board voted unanimously to exclude my property from their jurisdiction permanently, along with a formal public apology published in the local newspaper. The criminal case became a cautionary tale studied by property rights lawyers across the state. Detective Martinez told me it was the most well-documented harassment case he'd ever seen, and prosecutors used my evidence-gathering techniques as a training example for other victims of association abuse. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was personal. 8 months after Sandra's arrest, I hosted the first annual Pinewood Pond Day at my property. What started as a simple neighborhood barbecue turned into a celebration of community healing. Families brought picnic blankets and folding chairs, kids learned to fish with tackle donated by local sporting goods stores, and the smell of grilled burgers mixed with the clean scent of pond water in the perfect summer evening air. Robert Martinez's granddaughter caught her first bass that day, squealing with delight as the fish jumped and splashed.